Hi students, welcome to Preliminary Chemistry and the water video series. This is number 9 and the second of our videos on interactions with water. In the last one we kind of looked at most of the substances that are likely to be dissolving in water as a consequence of their ionic or polar nature. In this video, we're going to have a look at one or two other types of substances and actually why some of them are not such good solutes when it comes to forming solutions with water. Now, when an ionic substance is broken down, the ions dissociate. So this is a particularly important behavior that we see from chemical substances that are ionic in their nature. But some molecules can actually become ionized. They actually go from being molecular to ionic. And one of the good examples of that is hydrogen chloride, HCl. Now this molecule is hydrogen chloride, but you probably know it better as hydrochloric acid. Now it only becomes hydrochloric acid when it interacts with water. And when it interacts with water, it forms a hydrogen ion and a chloride ion. In actual fact, it forms a slightly more complex structure called a hydronium ion, but we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in the HSC course. Nevertheless, the key point here at the moment is that the hydrogen chloride molecule is actually ionized. It becomes two ions. And once it's in the ionic form, then all of the rules that we looked at for ionic substances dissolving in water apply to this as well. So the negative chlorines will behave in the same way that we looked at before, with a positively charged hydrogen interacting with it. And the hydrogen obviously is going to be interacting with the slightly negative oxygen part of the water molecule. Water's over here and of course over here. So if the molecular substance is small and if it can be ionized, then it will tend to dissolve in water. And some of the small non-polar molecules can do that to a certain extent. Large non-polar molecules are insoluble altogether. There's absolutely no way that they can dissolve, and even some of the smaller non-polar molecules have no opportunity of being ionized. And if they can't be ionized, then there's only one small possibility, and that is through the interaction of dispersion forces. So let's look at something like oxygen. Now we know that oxygen does dissolve in water. I mean, animals live in water and they get oxygen directly from the water. Think of fish, for example. But oxygen is a non-polar molecule. Unlike hydrogen chloride, which is a polar molecule, covalent. Oxygen is covalent but non-polar. But its non-polarity still means it can set up a temporary dipole. And of course that temporary dipole can then interact with the permanent dipole that has been established in the water molecule. And so you will get a small interaction here. It's not a great one. And so the solubility of oxygen in water is low. It's not high, but there is a slight solubility, and some of these smaller molecules may dissolve in water. The large ones don't. The point we're looking for here is whether or not the dispersion forces, these weak dispersion forces that are effectively being created, are large enough to overcome the intermolecular forces within the actual substance itself. So if oxygen is going to be more attractive to another oxygen molecule than it will be to a water. If it is, it'll stay together. If it isn't, it'll pull apart. The particles in this case don't undergo change, unlike the hydrogen chloride I talked about on the last slide. So all that's going to happen is we're going to get some slight interaction between the permanent dipoles in the water molecule and the temporary dipoles in our small molecular substances. So the general rule is most molecular substances that are non-polar will not dissolve in water, but very small ones you may get a small amount of solubility. Covalent network solids, on the other hand, these are big network structures. Think of diamond, which is just a network of carbon all connected to one another, or silicon dioxide, which is just sand, quartz, more specifically. And it's nonpolar. It's a nonpolar covalent network. There's no opportunity for hydrogen bonding or dipole-dipole interactions to form. So just like we talked about with the other covalent nonpolar substances, the only thing we can have are these dispersion forces caused by temporary dipoles. The strength of the covalent bonds, though, between the silicon and the oxygen are so strong that they are sufficient to overcome the attraction created by the dispersion forces between, say, if there's a temporary here, then we've got an oxygen and a hydrogen here with its permanent dipole, but the attraction between here and here is too weak, and hence there's no opportunity for us to pull these apart from one another, and these network solids are not soluble. They're insoluble in water. And the last group that, for a similar reason, that are also generally insoluble in water are the large molecules. These are really insoluble because of their size. Probably no other reason other than that. Cellulose is a polymer. It's a polymer of glucose, and we know that glucose has a lot of OH groups in it. So there is an opportunity for hydrogen bonding with water molecules. Unfortunately, because the molecule is just so large, there is a huge interaction between adjacent molecules, between one cellulose and another, between one protein and another. And the problem that we have with proteins is another complication, and that is that they often fold into secondary, tertiary, or even quaternary structures that are held together by little cross linkages, which are even stronger again. So it makes it very, very difficult for the interactions between the water molecules and the parts of the molecule that will create those hydrogen bonds to have sufficient strength to pull the molecules apart. And because they can't do that, proteins and polymers and large molecules like cellulose are insoluble in water. The key message to take away that we'll sort of reinforce in the next slide, next video, is that the interactions between the water molecules and the solute molecules need to be sufficiently high to overcome the forces between molecules within the potential solute. If they can, then the substance will dissolve. If they can't, then it will be insoluble. Thanks for watching.